that present. Yes. So Barry, I was just saying thank you very much for that presentation. I think it was quite informative. Now, my question, I think, and what I was quite interested in, or rather looking for, is the issue of the treatment of people with mental health conditions when it comes to things like. Okay. Can I proceed?
Yes, you may proceed, James.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I was talking about the treatment of people with such mental health conditions by medical insurance companies. Now you find that the insurance covers that we have in this country, for some reason, they have exclusion clauses that do not cover either these conditions or consequences of such conditions. So I've had an experience with a family member where even though they had a medical cover, unfortunately they harmed themselves. I think it was an attempted suicide, and they had to be hospitalized. And of course, after that, because of even being observed and being treated, they or being cancelled, they had to stay there for about a month. So, and then when it came to the time for being discharged, the insurance, the company, basically just they declined to settle the bill. They said that attempted suicide is not covered under their medical care, or rather, it's an exclusion. That was a personally inflicted harm, and therefore they could not honor that bill. And I thought to myself that that was number one, discriminatory. Number two, that I think, as you mentioned, that it is part of our international law, is part of our laws, as we know through Article 2, 5, and 6. Then I thought that that law, even if our own laws have not yet perhaps decriminalized suicide, the application of international law perhaps should apply. And so anyway, so my question is, number one, do you think that in this day and age, and even under constitutional dispensation, that the insurance companies should be allowed to maintain these exclusions?
Thank you, James. I'd like to say that I think the main reason that insurance companies steer away from mental health disorders is because they're not taken as seriously as the rest of the illnesses. If you think about it in society, like say, for example, those of us who have very, very African parents, if you go to them and you tell them that you are depressed, they're likely to tell you to either man up, or to grow a thicker skin, or to tell you to pray. We treat mental health disorders as something that you choose to inflict upon yourself. What people don't understand is, like, for you to self-harm, your mind is not in the right state, because you really can't go cutting yourself if you're enjoying it. You're cutting yourself to like look for comfort, or as a way of letting out your emotions. So it's not fair, it's very discriminatory not to offer insurance services for mental health disorders. But this won't go away until friendlier laws rather, are put in place. I find that some insurance companies offer psychiatric treatment, but this also just applies to the chemical imbalances and what do you call it? To chemical imbalances like in a bipolar and whatnot, and also for the conditions that you're born with, or the developmental conditions. They don't really consider the mood disorders as something worth insuring. So much as much as we would like to say that it is unfair and whatnot, suicide is still a crime in Kenya, even if international laws apply. And I think that's another reason for insurance companies steering away from self-inflicted harm, especially suicide attempts. So James, I'd say that for this to be remedied, it would have to be through changes in legislation and not necessarily changes in legislation and advocacy on the part of now us people who understand the impact mental health conditions have on the finances of the families and of the people who are affected. I hope, James, you have an answer.
Maybe just to add on that, James, the mental health action plan that emanated from the directive of the president in 2019 involved the coverage of a comprehensive mental health services benefit package under the universal healthcare, that is under NHIF. But up to date, this is just a plan. So it will need a lot of implementation through legislative policies and regulations. So once that is done, that is when it will become achievable. So the government, I believe, it has recognition that most of these insurance companies are not taking this seriously and excluding the mental health patients, which is to some extent discriminatory. Yes, and James, you'd like to add on that?
Yes, yes, I definitely get that legislation has yet to be rectified. I wonder, however, if more action, even from the advocacy side, or even in litigation, should not be applied, because if we do recognize that it is an issue of substantive justice, which is already provided for in the Constitution, I wonder why we cannot probably do a constitutional petition. I do remember that, for example, criminal defamation was outlawed by court. And I feel that perhaps maybe that is also another way that we can go about, number one, decriminalizing suicide without necessarily waiting for legislation, but also to find possibly constitutional interpretation as to whether what insurance companies are doing is discrimination, because as far as we know, even from consumer protection laws, you cannot legislate, or you cannot contract yourself out of liability. And I do believe that in these instances, insurance companies are getting away with liability. But thank you very much for the.
Yeah, that can be a first step. We can start by instituting a constitutional petition arguing that this is an infringement of this person, the people suffering from mental health. It's an infringement on their right to health. So maybe you can get some interpretation on that from the courts, because personally, from my own perspective, I can say that is really discriminatory. Yes, Angela.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Irene, for the elaborate presentation. So my question is on stigmatization and employment of mental health patients. Should they, I know because there's a lot of stigmatization, they won't disclose, but it will be very apparent to the employers that this person is suffering from something, because maybe, for instance, bipolar, when they're on their highs or lows, it will be noticeable. And maybe, I don't know what will happen to them. So what do you have to say about, if you're speaking to employers, what would you advise them? What would you tell them with regards to mental health patients? Because mental health patients are human beings, they have dignity, and they deserve a right to work and to earn a living. Thank you.
Okay, so about employers and mental health, I want to say that I worked in a place where the employer would give leave days for people even diagnosed with depression. So what would work for employers is a policy on mental health. For example, A policy on mental health would require that if you have a mental health disorder, you disclose it. Though in the Employment Act, you're not required to disclose any health conditions that you have. Okay, but for a person with a condition that could affect their performance at work, 1, 2, that could also disrupt workplace activities. Like if you happened to have a manic episode, you could disrupt a lot at work. It would be very safe to have employers have a policy that does not that acknowledges that mental health disorders are not a reflection of a person's inability to work or not to work, because people with mental disorders are professionals in very many areas. So that means you're qualified, but your health, like any other person, who could have a cold, who could have kidney problems, could have liver problems, it's your brain that's affected. So I'd say policies is what would work, and this could also be enshrined in even a constitutional petition. You could also use that to have employers include mental health policies at workplaces. And then there needs to be a lot of creation of awareness on the truth about mental health conditions. Because when you say that it is going to be apparent that a person has a mental health condition, you've already begun to discriminate a person with a mental health condition. Because you don't have anxiety disorder written on your forehead, you don't have ADHD written on your forehead. So I'd say employers need to adopt workplace policies that cover mental health. That's it, Angie. I hope I've answered you.
You have. Thank you so much.
I was thinking about some of the grounds listed under the Constitution on the basis of discrimination is disability. So by there being a lack of any law describing mental health as a disability, don't you think it would be a challenge being able to prove that they are discriminating against people with mental health on the ground of disability, like in the case of constitutional petition, as James had said?
I'd want you to read that. Please read the nani on discrimination if you have it with there. Yeah, just read it in full.
Somebody else can be asking the question as I pull it up.
Does anybody else have another question?
So,
Rogers, have you found it?
Yeah, here it is. So I'll just read it rather than sharing it on the screen. So no person shall be discriminated against directly or indirectly on any ground, including race, sex, pregnancy, marital status, health status, ethnic, social origin, color, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, dress, language, or birth.
Then I think you have your answer. You can argue on the fact of health status.
Yeah.
So you don't have to put
under disability
to classify a mental health condition as a disability yet.
Yeah. So maybe this is something somebody can take to court and argue that indeed they are discriminating against them on the basis of health status. So thank you for that. Anybody else with a question on our speaker's presentation? So
yeah, Rogers, maybe just
yes,
perhaps one other just clarification. So in your institute. So, so what sort of work do you do, perhaps with in relation to what Baru has presented to us? Is it something that you guys are involved in? I'm not familiar with the organization, to be honest.
We offer, James, you're asking me in regard to Sharia clinic. James.
Yes, yes. I was wondering whether this is a part of maybe advocacy work that you guys do.
Yeah. So what we usually do, we offer legal aid services on the digital platforms. Like right after this, we shall post it on YouTube so that people can come to the channel and learn about mental awareness and the mental health. Also, we urge people to give us topics which they'd like us to discuss. And from that, maybe we can channel and champion for on what we've discussed. Like today, I have a feel that somebody needs to take a constitutional petition to the High Court and argue that indeed people are being discriminated against by these insurance companies. Maybe you can give me the case in point, the example you've given, whereby your relative was denied health cover just because they inflicted the pain on themselves. Don't you agree, James?
Yes, definitely. It is something that I would very much want to follow, and I believe perhaps it is also something that others have experienced. So, and being that we public interest litigation, I think now is constitutional. I feel that it is something that perhaps could benefit from joint effort by like-minded people, and perhaps we could seek on behalf of everybody else either constitutional interpretation or even or basically just to seek to decriminalize some of these things like suicide.
Yes.
Rogers, I agree with James, and also to add on to the point that Angie raised. To add on to the point that Angie raised, if you're denied a job on the basis, or if you're fired. Jane, could you mute your mic?
Yes, I'm muted. I think it's Jack Masawa.
Okay. All right. So I was saying also to add on to the point that Angie raised, if a person is denied a job or if you're fired on the basis of your mental health condition, that is also something that a public interest suit could cover, because you've been discriminated against on the basis of your health status. So basically, I agree, James, completely, that people with like-minded opinions should actually come together and we seek for some interpretation from the court, because some of these things people suffer silently, and you end up now even getting into a downward spiral. Like if you lose your job because of your mental health condition, you're likely to end up in a really, really depressed state, to add on to your mental health status.
And I wish.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And actually, I think there's a recent case where, although this one was disability, I think Safaricom were not fined. Somebody was awarded substantial damages for being denied employment on the basis of disability. Although that one, I think it was to do with physical disability. But even if according to where our state of dispensation, our state of jurisprudence is that even mental health can be seen within the lens of disability. I definitely believe that that is something that we can also that can also be brought to court for interpretation and enforcement.
Yes, it is, and we can start with us like just the way we started here. Like if you could have a look at that health insurance policy cover, then we can have a place to start. James, will you be willing to share the health cover? the document?
Yes,
Policy.
yes. As soon, yes, I of course I will look for it. And obviously I can engage you after this. We can engage offline and see how to get the issue started.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else with a question for our speaker? I think we've covered so much in depth that people feel they have covered enough. James, you had something to add? Okay.
No. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this session. I think it's quite informative, and definitely I look forward to more of the same going forward.
So thank you all for coming and joining us tonight. If you have any topic you'd like us to cover on Sharia Clinic, you can head over to our YouTube channel, it's Sharia Clinic, and you can request to us what topic you'd like us to cover in the coming weeks. That being said, I would like to urge you, I'd like to wish you all the best in your weekend and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Rogers. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night.
Okay.